What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, creator of the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. I want to continue to examine 100 years of world championship fights. But I'm going to jump into January 12, 1956. I'm going to pay homage and tribute to a 5-time colored heavyweight champion, 1-time Mexican heavyweight champion, 1-time Australian heavyweight champion, defeated Sam McVeigh for that crown, 1-time European heavyweight champion, 1-time colored middleweight champion, 1-time Boston amateur featherweight champion. It's my number one ranked greatest fighter in boxing history. Shout out to Zeno. Wanted me to talk about Sam Langford. Well, let's talk about Sam Langford. Want to pay homage to Sam Langford. He was born March 4th, 1883. Weymouth Falls, Digby County, Nova Scotia. That's in Canada. He died January 12, 1956. Some say 72, some say 73 years of age at the time of his death. He would reside in Cambridge, Middlesex County in Massachusetts, United States. He stood 5'6" ¾ some say 5'7" inches. Weighed 142 to 180 pounds. He started boxing as a featherweight. He was managed by Joe Woodsman. Now, between 1903 and 1926, he had 3 amateur fights, won them all, knocked out all his opponents, and became the featherweight champion of Boston. Now, if you look at record books, you'll see 252 world professional bouts, 178 wins and 129 knockouts, 32 losses and 40 draws. Well, I am here to tell you that Sam Langford had well over 500 fights. He was a janitor at the Lenox Athletic Club. And what was interesting about Sam Langford? Never fought before. But that's where he landed a job. At the Lenox Athletic Club. That's where they had boxing. And he would observe the fighters in the rings, sparring on a heavy bag, speed bag, as well as jumping rope. And it wasn't until a young man who was one of the top-notch fighters in that town was waiting for a sparring partner. That was late. And Sam was the only one near the ring, and he asked him if he minded getting in the ring and spar with him, move around with him a little bit. And Sam looked around and couldn't believe he was being asked to do so. Threw the broom down and walked into the ring. He was more afraid of getting in trouble as opposed to being afraid of the man in the ring. My understanding, knocked the man out with one punch. And that's interesting because Sam Langford would discover boxing as a janitor. And a Barbados demon, Joe Walcott, would retire as a janitor in New York's Madison Square Garden. I always thought that was interesting. Sam Langford will be a Ring Boxing Hall of Fame, Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. One of the greatest fighters in boxing history. And as I pay homage to Sam Langford, hopefully you'll have a better understanding as to why I have him ranked so high. Amazing. Now, between April 20th, 1903, November 24th, 1904, he faced Andy Watson. Andy Watson was something else. Had a temper on him and he would get shot in the bar. But he was some fighter. He had 2 fights between April 3rd, 1903 and April 16th, 1903. Drew 1 and won 1 with Stonewall Allen. Between December 8th, 1903 and September 5th, 1904. His second full year as a professional, because he started in 1902. He defeated lightweight champion Joe Gans. He drew with Barbados Demon, welterweight champion, 15 rounds. Between 1903 and 1904. Between December 23rd, 1903. He had 4 no decisions, 1 win, 1 no contest. With Charles Jack Blackburn. 6 fights in all. Between April 11th, 1904, February 13th, 1905, he had 4 fights with Philadelphia's Dave Holly. 1 loss, 2 draws, and 1 win. Also that year, he would face Jeff Clark and Jack Blackburn. He had 11 fights between November 11th, 1910 and June 1st, 1920. 5 no decisions, 4 wins, 2 draws with Jeff Clark, Joplin Ghost. 6 fights between May 26, 1905, November 12, 1907. 4 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss. Young Peter Jackson. April 26, 1906, he lost 15 rounds in a colored heavyweight championship opportunity with Little Arthur, Jack Johnson. Quiet as it's kept. Sam Langford had a fractured hand going into that fight, but he couldn't pass up that opportunity. Jack Johnson weighed 185 pounds, and Sam Langford weighed 156 pounds. Between September 25th, 1907 and April 14th, 1910, he had 7 wins and 2 draws, 7 fights combined with Jim Barry. 14 fights between December 25th, 1905 and September 14th, 1917. He had 2 draws, 5 no decisions, 4 wins, 3 losses with Joe Jeanette. Between May 1st, 1914, January 17th, 1922, he had 10 no decisions, 2 wins, and 6 losses with Harry Wills, 22 bouts combined. Between April 1st, 1911, August 14th, 1920, 4 draws, 5 no decisions, 1 loss with Sam McVeigh, 15 fights combined. He was in a ring with fighters such as Elbow McFadden. They called him George Elbow McFadden, Dixie Kid, Jeff Clark, Jack Thompson, Jack Blackburn, Stanley Ketchel was the world middleweight champion. Dave Holly fought him 3 times. Dave Holly was creator of the Philadelphia shoulder roll. He was a great lightweight. Young Peter Jackson, George Gunther, John Lester Johnson, Belfoot Walcott, Andy Watson. 1904, he'd have 3 fights with Dave Holly, Joe Walcott, Jack Blackburn. 2 fights with him. In 1904, Andy Watson would fight him twice. 1905, young Peter Jackson 3 times, Joe Jeanette, Belfoot Walcott. George Cole. 1906, Jack Johnson and Joe Jeanette. Blackfoot Simmons, they called him Kid Monday. Young Peter Jackson. 1906. Being in the ring with Klondike Haynes and Jim Flynn, they called him the Fireman. Tony Ross, Bob Armstrong. Sam Langford knocked out Fireman Jim Flynn. 7 minutes. He was out cold. And that put me in mind, Donovan Razor Ruddock, when he knocked out Michael Dose in New York's Madison Square Garden. Put him to sleep in 7 minutes. And the entire time I was in the garden, until I left the garden, I didn't know whether or not Michael Dose, R.I.P. to him, had made it. Until I got home and listened to the news. Sam Langford was in a ring with Harry Wills 22 times. Harry Wills was a colored heavyweight champion. Joe Jeanette 14 times. He was a colored heavyweight champion. Sam McVeigh 15 times. He was a world colored heavyweight champion. Bill Tate. 1903, Joe Gans, world lightweight champion. 1904, Joe Walcott, world welterweight champion. Now I want to tell you what distinguishes Sam Langford than any other fighter in boxing history. The only fighter, black or white, to fight the first black lightweight champion in boxing history. 1903, Joe Gans, and he defeated him. The only fighter, black or white, same fighter, to fight the first black welterweight champion. 1904, Barbados Demon, Joe Walcott, 15 rounds to a draw. The only fighter, black or white, to fight the first black middleweight champion. Theodore Tiger Flowers, 1922. Put him to sleep in 3 rounds. The only fighter, black or white, to fight the first black heavyweight champion. 1906. Jack Johnson, at that time, was the colored heavyweight champion. Jack Johnson took that title away from Denver Ed Martin in 1903. And Sam Langford would go 15 rounds with Sam Langford, who was the first world heavyweight champion as a black fighter. And at that time, he was the colored heavyweight champion. I mean, I can't even make this stuff up. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about the era of the fighters that you watched. Did they ever do anything like this? Your answer is going to be no. You'll never have another Sam Langford boxing history. Let's talk about what he went through. The abuse in his home. At the age of 14, he made it to Boston. At 15. On his own. Got a job as a janitor in a gym. Knocked out the best fighter they had in there. When Sam Langford came around, black fighters didn't dictate anything. They couldn't ask for special made gloves. They couldn't ask for ring size. They couldn't ask for the opponents that they would love to fight. Sam Langford had rode in the back of a wagon, as did Barbados Demon Joe Walcott and others. But he would have a burlap bag over his head. In the backwoods, he wouldn't have a clue who he was going to fight. And he was so feared in the North and in the South that early in his career, he had to arrive in the back of a wagon with a burlap bag over his head. So the managers of the opponents wouldn't know who he was until he got there. Sam Langford many times got into